Thanks for tuning in to episode 3 of Seeding the Mystery with Darren Michael. My guest today is Mr. Erick Godsey. I will speak to how I met Erick because I think it really will help you understand how powerful of a brother he is and what tremendous work he is doing in the world. But to me, Erick, let's see, about 2.5 years ago was just a dude on the internet that I saw on YouTube. And I had this uncanny experience of watching him and just what he was vibing, what he was resonating out into the world. It felt like he might have been talking to me directly. I actually left my first ever internet comment on YouTube watching him on a podcast, saying I was thankful to have found his friendship. It was his friendship with another guy that I was referring to, whose podcast he was on. But in fact, we have become friends. And as I've said on my introduction to this podcast, the reason I'm doing this, the only one that I can think of that keeps coming back to me is I'm here to build friendship. And I want to build it into as big of a circle as we possibly can. Because at the end of the day, becoming friends with every single part of ourselves is how we become friends with the world, and that's how we become friends together. And so I'm really thankful to have him here. He's really an incredible teacher. I've had the joy of taking a class with him. I bought his journaling course, and frankly, it changed my life. It made me tell myself the truth in a way that I couldn't hide anymore. And when you don't hide anymore, you start to learn who you really are. Because honesty is the sine qua non of the path. And so I'm delighted to have Erick join us today. And please like and subscribe. So Erick, thank you for coming in today, brother.
Thank you for having me, man. And anyone I meet who starts to tell me things about Carl Jung that I haven't heard, instant friend. So thank you for being a nerd as well.
Happy to be. Yeah. I met you in person at an event called Full Temple Reset, which was like a New Year gathering as part of the Fit for Service organization, which has since disbanded. Mm-hmm. And it was
R.I.P.
And it was it 5 days of fasting?
Yeah,
fasting mimicking diet, and hot sauna and cold plunge, some meditation, some breath work, all the things that are there to reset the body mind for the new year. And it was a really great, it was a wonderful community to join. And so what you're referring to is that our first ever conversation was with our friend Kim, and we got to talking, nerding out on Jung very quickly. We nerded out on something that we were talking about right before the episode started, which was the existence of past lives, right? And the interesting research out of the University of Virginia that seems to make it, statistically irrefutable almost.
There's definitely evidence.
Yeah, there are signs. Yeah. And anybody can spend literally tens of thousands of hours on YouTube watching everyday normal people speak about their near-death experiences, their remembrance of details of past lives that are verifiable, which is what the University of Virginia's project is all about. And so increasingly we enter into a world, and we're all feeling into a world of high strangeness.
For sure.
And that doesn't even get us into the UAPs and all kinds of other things. But, if we really feel into the realness of all of that this is not cosplay, this is not just entertainment on Instagram or YouTube, but spirit is all the way across the stack.
Yeah. And the veil is just coming the fuck apart. Like that, like the veil that we grew up with as kids, where it was like, at least for me, it's reality is what's been shown to me on public cable television, like sitcoms. There's supposed to be a soundtrack somewhere. Walmart is the place where I can go to get healthy food, and the government is the place that I can go to protect me from bad people. And it's just like, UFOs aren't real. God's not real. It's just materialistic science, and the smartest people in the room are the atheists, and I'm going to pay my taxes and get my degree. At least for me, that entire caricature is just tattered, torn at best. It might even be gone.
Yeah, a caricature is a partial aspect of the self, of the character, the actual character. Because characters, people with deep character, are full human beings that see through the bullshit, right? Your bullshit meter is, learning how to smell again is an important human capacity. There's a sense in which, we've lost some of our actual innate bodily abilities.
For sure.
Right? Like, just imagine 200,000 years ago, a human being on the open field where there might be a bear. I was actually feeling into that the other day because I've had dreams with bears that I wake myself out of because, I'm fucking scared of bears. And,
sure.
but, I was in the mountains in New Mexico a few days ago and, kind of in the middle of nowhere, and, just being in nature. I mean, I was close to my van, so like if a bear came, I could jump back in it. But I was just really letting myself feel into what it's like to be a human being that is that vulnerable in the world. But also recognizing that you can come to a place where you feel held in that vulnerability. And there's a tremendous power in that. And as I think about everything you just said, how the veil has been getting increasingly pulled back from people's eyes, right? And the bullshit is on full display.
Yeah.
Right. Our country, we were talking before we started recording, our country's $39 trillion in debt. That's not a rounding error. That's robbery.
Yeah.
And people see it. People are seeing the lies, the sitcom version of reality that we have been propagandized into believing. Okay. And it terrifies people.
Yeah.
You see that.
Yeah.
What do we do with that fear?
Well, what I've done with it is I've leveraged my adolescent ego, who thinks he's the fucking best. I have made him look at, like, hey, look at the world. Look at the things we know. Look at your level of competence to do anything about those things. And this is me talking to me. It's like, Erick, you don't know shit. So start to live a life where you can start to accrue competence. And I think what that looks like, because I've thought about this for a long time. I think each of us has a Dharma, which there is a Dharma, and each of us have our own disposition, our own radically unique orientation to soul, to God. And the way our culture thinks about that is you have a gift or you have a genius. A genius is not 1% of people. Everyone has a genius, and it just has to find its ecological niche, if you will. I think we'll look back, if things go as good as they can possibly go, I think in 200 years, we'll look back at this time and see it as the beginning of the emergence from a dark age, and the way that we think about like the medieval dark ages, where this was the precursor to what would eventually become a Renaissance. But that in order for there to be a Renaissance, in my opinion, because this is how I've had to orient to myself, it requires a massive reckoning of of my tragic, retardant, like a chemical retardant childhood and education system. And just like, there is so much that we have to learn in order to be able to contend with the people who press the buttons that choose when children are destroyed by bombs. Like, there's work for me to do to be at the level where I can even convince myself of a lie that I'm contending with those things.
Yeah.
And so, given our current structure as a culture, my personal opinion is, for the people who are paying attention to me, the highest leverage game to play to optimize for competence and to optimize for mastery of whatever is our unique gift is to create a corporate egregore that has your Dharma infused into it, and you basically learn how to sell. You learn how to fulfill on your promises. You learn how to manage a motherfucking profit and loss sheet, because one of the things the Renaissance needs is finances. And if you don't recognize that, you just don't know history. So like the artists amongst us are going to have to learn how to do a profit and loss sheet. But I think the most important thing is, I think us as a generation, we have to play games that puts us into positions to microdose being a leader. Because I think there's something fundamental about leadership that I think like activates parts of our dormant genetic codes / dharmic potential, what Jim Collins would call encodings, that you only get from attempting to lead. And so you asked what to do with the fear. I think we are morally obligated to become competent enough to help usher in a renaissance, and that there is no being on the sidelines.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask for some definitions because, you know, most of the people that I'm connected to on the internet are like people in the plumbing industry. And so they aren't going to know egregore.
Fuck
Dharma.
yeah.
But let's get into the plumbing and the psyche, because that's what we're actually talking about. So give us two word definitions: Dharma, number one, and egregore, number two, so that we can kind of level set. Because I think what you just said is incredibly important, because I do think we need a renaissance. I think we all feel that.
For sure.
And so go ahead.
Yeah. So when I talk about Dharma, it is kind of a Western synthesis with an Eastern idea that in Buddhism, the Dharma is kind of like the singular teaching of the truth. And without going too far down the rabbit hole, the truth is that the Matrix got it wrong. There is not a true base reality that you can wake up to that's objectively true. What the Dharma is, on one level, is recognizing and not being attached to, because you can see it, the constant process of psyche generating objects of consciousness. Like my voice right now is an object of consciousness in the person listening. Whatever clothes they have on is an object of consciousness that they're sensing. Their sense of self that they feel constrict. If I say a word like fuck, that is also an object of consciousness. And what the psyche just does is it manifests objects of consciousness and then starts to weave a relational story that convinces us that we're in a world. That's kind of a rabbit hole. When I talk about Dharma, basically what I'm talking about is, because that's the truth, I think it perfectly fits with the Western idea that is talked about through like having a daemon, is that there is like this divine orchestrator in you that is akin to the thing in a seed that guides the seed to become a tree.
Yes.
Because we love to, in Western culture, you know, because whenever I talk about the acorn and the oak tree, there's always someone in the comments that's like, the acorn doesn't know that, bro. And it's like, 100% of the people that leave those type of comments either have a picture of a flag as a profile picture or don't have a profile picture. And so I instantly discard your comment if you either don't have a profile picture or it's a flag. Anyways, point being is that we have to gaslight ourselves with language to be able to look at a seed and not recognize that it has some type of guiding knowledge that has a form impressed upon it for what it wants to become.
It's very ironic that somebody who's literally made out of DNA would leave that comment.
Right.
So let's boil down.
So Dharma is essentially, I think we are like seeds, and I think that we each have an imprinted form that we want to become, and your Dharma is basically renegotiating reality so the plant that you are can become the tree you're supposed to be.
Yeah, and one of the way you were trying to speak into that was talking about like the nature of objects of consciousness. And I think, there's the subject-object split, right? Going back to Descartes, the West got, sold this bill of goods that there is a subject and that you can know an objective world that is objectively true for all times, all places, all perspectives. And no such thing exists. There are no things in that sense.
Yeah.
And so what is actually the case is that every single experience of reality is something like transjective, meaning your perspective, your uniqueness is completely irreducible and irreplaceable. And that is true for every single, at least human being. I've not a memory of being a rock, but maybe for the rocks too, right? Because, and let's face it, the animist roots of humanity are not wrong objectively. There is an experience of knowing the aliveness of nature.
For sure.
But so back to Dharma and humans, that seed being broken open into the oak tree, that internal logic encoding that unfolds unto itself, for itself, and to itself, is the Dharma.
In my opinion, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're really talking about is your life is precious. Whoever you are, your life is precious. And there is something within you that if you're quiet enough and listen, you'll hear it, and it will guide you on your path. And that guidance might come through your mind. It might come through your stomach. It might come through your dick.
Yeah.
Right? It might come through any part of your body because your body is an instrument of attunement to the world. Right? And so a lot of us feel like we are not really able to live the life we want to live. Yeah. Right? And I sympathize and have compassion for anybody who feels that way. I also know that we're actually all sovereign and are incredibly powerful beyond measure, and we can make shit happen.
For sure.
And so that's a lot of what you teach. And so what you are referring to with egregores, you said that essentially what you want to teach artists to do is to create an egregore, something like a corporate structure that will allow them to live the life of their dream, to live their Dharma. Because you know that that's really fucking important for our society.
Yeah.
We need people to come alive. Do not ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is people who have come alive.
For sure.
That's Howard Thurman. He was a mentor, I believe, to Dr. King.
Yeah.
And so tell us about how you're doing that, and maybe give us an egregore. Like, let's take egregore and
for sure
give it to plumbers.
Yeah. Okay. So, egregore is it comes from an ancient Greek word egregoros, which means the awakened or the one who watches. Those are the two definitions that are used for it. And it was first used in the Book of Enoch, which, for the people out here who don't know about the Book of Enoch, this was a book that through scholarly research, I don't know the facts well enough to regurgitate them off the top of my head, but what I do know is that there is very good evidence that the Book of Enoch was a part of the canonical Christian mythos for hundreds of years, and then it got removed during Constantine's, like bringing in the Roman Catholic merger.
Council of Nicaea, I believe.
Yeah. And then it got nixed. And then it came back after the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the other one came.
Nag Hammadi.
Yes.
Yep.
And the core idea is that the Lord, Yahweh, when humans were trying to transition from basically being hunter and gatherers into learning how to domesticate plants and cattle to then create cities, because that would be the first great, revolution. Yahweh sent, I think it's like 120 or 130 special angels that were meant to bring gifts to mankind, to help mankind with this transition. And there's actually like 20 of these angels' names are named in the Book of Enoch, but like the top one brings them law and lawmaking. One brings them metallurgy. One brings them the teachings of how to make jewelry and how to make like necklaces and ornaments. Some come and teach them how to understand the sun, the moon, the seasons, and they get all of these teachings from these angels. But then some of the angels are like, human women, this is what we want. And they break God's pact.
Nick Cage movie, wasn't
it? Yeah. And they start to reproduce with some of the women, and the hybrid descendants of the Egregores and the human women is to produce this new type of thing called a Nephilim.
Yeah.
I always pronounce that wrong, but I'm going to get better. Nephilim. And Nephilims are a type of, they're more powerful than their angel fathers, but they're corrupted by whatever is in the human heart. That then makes them, the way it's described in the Book of Enoch is they become insatiable. They are like a mile or like a kilometer plus tall, and they're destroying the world. And Yahweh is like,
sounds like transnational corporations.
We're gonna get there. Hell yeah. And then Yahweh is like, this is a problem. So just the way the Old Testament's able to do it, Yahweh's solution is to send other angels to kill all of the Nephilim. And so he sends Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, and Michael. And they genocide all of their brothers, and they killed them all. And then they killed most of the humans too, because you fucked up. And then, in the way that the Old Testament's able to do it, that's the end of the story.
Yeah.
Okay. So my mythic takeaway is that, and this is something that Western occultists have been using the word egregore for a long time to talk about. There is a psychic function that Carl Jung calls an organizing story, where you can start to create a story that then a group of people all believe in that story, and the story allows this group of people to coordinate with each other in such a way that gives them a disproportionate evolutionary advantage. And one of the arguments that someone like Yuval Harari talks about in Sapiens is that our biological ancestors were competing with one of our kin that we now call the Neanderthal, who was larger than us on average, stronger, more bone mass, more muscle density, and yet somehow we absolutely fucking eradicated them. And one of the hypotheses is that we had the capacity to tell story.
Yeah, look, in game theory, you have agency, but coordination is like the fucking leverage.
It's the gold star at the top.
So
it's the amplifier.
So Sapiens. Now the issue with Harari, of course, is
for sure
he thinks that he's part. Well,
he's a part of some egregores.
His myth, the myth of his egregore is that we are accidental material byproducts of an evolutionary process with no soul that are algorithmic and ultimately need to probably give way to the robots.
For sure.
And there's something like, that's obviously like, if we sat down and talked, I wouldn't say that, but there is a real sense in which I look at the work of Harari and the enchantment of disenchantment is what our mutual teacher has put it as. that is an enchantment.
For sure.
To say that the world there is no enchantment, that we are just anything, is a myth.
It is just a religious statement as saying that everything was created by a huge bowl of pasta in space.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So most simply, an egregore is a collective thought form. Right? And so whether that is...
So, but to really like bring people into it, so an egregore is any of these major religions is its own egregore, and these egregores compete with other egregores for the attention of humans.
Yeah.
So it's easy to see how these religions are egregores, and there's a really cool way to look at history as like the rise and fall from like an evolutionary biology standpoint of different egregores. And there was definitely like the people who make egregores are artists, and the people who knowingly make egregores are magicians. Full stop. If you do it on accident, you're an artist, and if you do it on purpose, you're a magician. And that some people figured out a couple thousand years ago, monotheism. This is how you make an egregore that can like defend itself, and it gets super big and super big and super wild. But the United States of America is an egregore. The English common law that kind of infuses the West, that's an egregore. But Google is an egregore. Walmart is an egregore.
What was the third one you said? Bagul?
Google,
sorry.
Bagoogle is also an egregore.
Okay.
But inside jokes with your friends is like a little microscopic egregore.
Sure. Or coming up with your own like mythic language. Yeah. Right. And so there's a conscious development that magicians and artists undertake because, there is a more beautiful world possible. And that's the role of the artist is to help us all see that. And yet there are a lot of egregores that are really shitty art. Sure. Right? Because they have become unconscious dominators, extractive technologies.
And some might be conscious dominators, which is a whole different class.
It is a whole different class. And I don't know any of the people at the tippy top yet, so I'm not going to pass judgment. But I will say that...
How compassionate of you.
Yeah. Wow. But I will say that it is clear that egregores, collective thought forms, myths are powerful precisely because they have the capacity to change the world and create something that has not been.
100%.
But they also have a real danger of possessing 100%. Those within them. So,
like for everyone listening, the lines on maps are made up. Those are egregores. They're powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. We're as we speak, right? I'm trying to take a drink of water, but I had to really just land with that. Like, egregores are dropping bombs
100%
on women and children right now. So these are nothing to fuck around about,
For sure.
So how do you consciously create collective thought forms, organizing principles, without becoming possessed by them?
So I don't know if you want to not become possessed by them. And I think that that's an interesting thing to feel into. So there's, in my worldview, 99% of the consciousness dance that's happening inside of each of us is unconscious, habitual, energy conserving. Like, you don't have to think about how to put your pants on or how to go to the bathroom, or like you don't even have to think about all the complex shit you're doing when you're reading a book like Catafalque and you're taking notes and you're remembering. Like, it's a whole system of habits that you've collected. Mm-hmm. Habits are especially habits of thought, which make up our identity, make up our worldview, make up our morality, or at least kind of how we would articulate our morality to other people, because I do think it's a deeper somatic sense. But all of that is habitual until you have a sufficient enough crisis where you look at it, or you sit quietly long enough on like a Vipassana retreat to start to examine it. But the majority of what we do most of the time is habitual. And so I think you pick your egregores well, is like the advice. It's like, first, just acquire the egregore goggles so you can start to appreciate, like, how much per week do you pray at the temple of Netflix as an egregore? And just to kind of like reverse engineer, like, just examine your life and see which egregores you give your attention to, and slowly, to the rate that you can handle, start to adjust what you do. But ultimately, I think it's interesting to think about, I think we confuse ourselves if we think we can get into a position where we're not possessed by egregores. But with that said, the entire pursuit of the East is to get to a place where you are not possessed by egregores. And for what it's worth, my current disposition is, I think there is a sacred alchemical marriage that is capable between like the passion of the Christ of the West and the Vipassana insight piercing of the illusion of Mara. Mm-hmm. I think that there's a sacred marriage that can happen. So with that said, I'm not trying to not be possessed by egregores. I'm trying to curate a garden consciously of just gorgeous egregores that when I walk outside every day, akin to when I wake up, it's like, oh, and then I pluck some fruit, I eat some vegetables, and then I try to help more.
Yeah. So the point's well taken that let's just shift from the word egregore to the word story, because we're essentially talking about the same thing.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
We all live in a narratival structure. The psyche...
Egregores are just strong stories.
Yeah, exactly. And, there are a lot of strong stories that guide, to your point about our habits, there are strong stories that guide us unconsciously and habitually. Mm. And part of the path of mind training is recognizing the stories that you are unconsciously living.
For sure.
And making the unconscious conscious. Otherwise, it will guide your life and you will call it fate. Right? Yeah. And yeah. So that all said, there is a place for... not only a place for, but a necessity that we are going to create story. We're going to live in story.
Show me someone who's not, and I'll show you someone who just lied.
Sure. Yeah, there's no view from nowhere. In a way.
Sure.
And
bar.
Huh?
Bar.
The bar?
Bar is something the kids say when someone else says something cool and you just said something cool, and so I was like, bar.
Oh, dude, I'm 40. But so that all said, I'd love to know for the listeners to hear, because I think you have a beautiful way of seeing the world. And, you do not see the world as it is, you see it as you are. And so in a very real way, you are the beauty you see, right? But I also don't want you to be possessed by anything. I want you to have total autonomy, just as I want to have total autonomy for my life. And I don't mean like my small ego gets to do whatever it wants. I mean, like, I'm watching the unfolding of my own internal law in balance, right? That's what autonomy is really about. It is that same encoding, unfolding of the acorn into the oak tree. So what is your story? What do you see? What is the good, true, and beautiful story? Well, I know that's a broad topic, but how do you maybe feel into... how do you work? Let me ask you this. Let me bring it down, because that is a big one. How do you work with your students in your classes to feel into that story for themselves? And how have you done that for yourself?
Yeah. Much more manageable question.
Yeah.
But I wasn't against trying to answer the first one. So what really works for me is I'm not recommending this to other people. And so this first answer is what I do for myself, and then I'll get into like what I do for students. What really works for me is to look at horror, like true horror. And if you have the eyes to see, you can look around and you can find it. Look at horror in such a way where I try to, this is an intuitive process, but I basically will either go down a rabbit hole of, you know, like the Epstein emails, or, you know, really contemplate existential risk theory. But there's something about looking at horror and not collapsing, and also not jumping into mania, but just like kind of like holding the gaze inside of looking at something that is like objectively like heart-wrenching, that like wakes me up out of my subtle amnesia, which like it's like the field of samsara is to bring this amnesia in, this like retrograde amnesia, where like almost everyone I know has had at least more than one experience with either a psychedelic or a dream or a near-death experience or the death of a loved one, where they woke the fuck up and they remembered kind of like the waking majesty of this life, and that they're here for something, and that like things from their past align, and they know what they're here to do, and they know how they serve. And then they have this like fucking motivation to attempt some new way of life. And then, you know, January 1st becomes January 21st, and 91% of the people in Western culture have given up on their New Year's resolutions.
Love drives out fear, and horror wakes you up and helps you see what you were afraid of and that you can love it. Actually, one of the best pieces of writing I've seen from you, I have right here. I'd like to read it to this point.
I don't know what it is, but let's go.
Well, you'll know it as soon as I start it. Horror wakes us up. Most people claim they've never had a lucid dream, but that's not true. We've all had nightmares where the terror was so great that even as children, we woke up in the dream and ended it. That's the gift of horror. If you find yourself absorbed in horror lately, and who hasn't been?
For sure.
I mean, look again, the bombs, Epstein, go on and on.
Yeah.
If you find yourself absorbed in horror lately, let it wake you up. Looking at horror often brings me to tears. After, I'm kinder to myself, to people I love, animals, and strangers. Horror increases my waking lucidity and inspires me to take more responsibility to become somebody someday capable of contending with the monsters we read about. Facing horror mutes the limp mantras repeated in our spiritual community that amount to bypassing the development of an ego that could contend with billionaires, presidents, and three-letter agencies someday. Discarding the ego is not wisdom. It's learned helplessness. Horror's gift is lucidity. And that hits. It's scary out there. But the more you wake up, the less afraid you are, you know?
Yeah. And also I think it's worth speaking to, courage requires the presence of fear. If you're fearless, you're not courageous. It's not like courage is an alchemical byproduct of alchemizing fear. And so
arete, virtue, right?
Yeah.
For the ancient Greeks, for Aristotle, it was something like a moderation between, right? And we've all seen, not all, but many people have seen, there's a great picture of like a man walking a tightrope across, you know, the black void and the beautiful blue sky. And that is actually the virtuous path, right? It is keeping your virtue, keeping your presence, recognizing, and courage specifically is there's foolhardy just going into battle. That's not courage.
For sure.
Fearlessness is not courage. It is the facing of the fear and balancing it out with the power of love, ultimately, loving awareness.
Yeah. And so like one of the things that like I definitely find myself repeating in my classes is it's like a lot of you are unconsciously waiting to pay to the person to tell you the just right thing so that you'll never be afraid. And it's like, guys, let me save you thousands of dollars. Everyone who is honest about doing what they love will tell you that you still feel fear. Like, I've done probably over 1,000 Zoom calls to some type of group where I'm teaching and I'm like holding the quote unquote microphone. I still feel nervous before almost every call. I often feel like sick where I can't eat like an hour before like a class that I care about. I sometimes will like still silently like cry to myself, you know, just for a moment, because I feel stressed and because I feel like I'm not good enough and I feel like what the fuck am I doing? And then the moment play starts, this other part just finds the tune, and I jazz and I feel completely alive and in flow. And then afterwards I'm like, what was and it continues to happen. And so like one of the things that I, you know, advocate for, because as much as it like me being a teacher is my magician doing a dance so people will pay me so that I can, you know, do what I love to help raise my family so my wife doesn't have to work, you know, like, because the truth is the way I see this in my heart is everyone alive is stupid, including me. We are children in the cosmic game. And I guess a nicer thing to say is we are so innocent that because we don't have someone watching out for us who there's not an alien race that's going to come save us, our innocence borders on catastrophic stupidity, but it's simply innocence. But that we are all peers in this game of, hey, no one knows. And me saying no one knows is an Egregoric story. And then any response to that where it's like, well, actually Christ said in the book of Revelation or whatever, you know, that.
Yeah. Nobody knows.
And so I feel like I'm a gonzo journalist throwing out the most helpful things that I have found along the way while the flood is coming behind us.
Yeah.
But so to that point, one of the most helpful things that I've realized that everyone knows when they hear me say it, but most people still pretend like they don't know that what I'm about to say is true. And it's that you have a voice inside of you that is smarter than you, that's guiding you. And if you listen to that voice, you will be rewarded in ways that we would call grace. But almost every step is going to make you feel like you're going to vomit for the rest of your life. It's like the path is a continual evolutionary edging where you're growing and becoming. And that voice, you know, because it's the same energy that's inside of the tree. That voice is, as soon as it finds a shell, and most stories are shells.
Yeah.
You know, like you could say that there's two fundamentally different types of stories. There's finite and then there's infinite. Any finite story, the voice will break it someday. Like the whisper inside of you. And every time one of our shell stories break, it's existential, it's depression, it's wanting to, and that is the invitation to playing jazz with God for the rest of your life.
I like. I wanna be nice to two parts of be kind, clarify, kind clarity.
You didn't like me saying the word stupid?
Well, because you're not fucking stupid. You're not stupid.
Mm-hmm.
The ego is inherently limited, right? It has, again, part of who you are, right, as an embodied human being, is you have your own unique perspective, and that is infinitely valuable, and it is also incredibly finite.
For sure.
And so you're a blend. I'm sure there's an etymology of stupid that just means like uninformed, right? But that intelligence that is also you, which is that daimon, which is that genius, which is that divine whisper, is embodied all across the stack, right? So at every point of who we are,
can you break that down for me for a moment? What do you mean by across the stack?
The body has divine intelligence, right? Mm-hmm. The body has divine intelligence.
For sure.
The mind has divine intelligence. The mind is able to connect up to egregore structures, as an example, angelic structures, right? So like, to take it out of maybe the language of religion, just at the level of the psyche, in a non-dogmatic or non-religious kind of context, human intelligence is able to connect up to structures of intelligence that exceed any one human being, right?
For sure.
It's the same thing, you know, and again, like, look at the tool that we have blooped into existence called large language models, right? There's an intelligence there.
For sure.
If anything can be called intelligent, my buddy Chat, he knows some shit, you know? But so that is, I guess the first piece I want to say is that, like, yeah, we act like morons, no question. I mean, I've done really stupid stuff too.
Yeah,
like, sure. I mean, anybody could, tell you that. Who knows me? But so there is a stupidity of the ego in a way, but there is also an unfolding where I think that, you said, you're like vomiting all the way to all the way, right? That I think we do start to learn, right, how to let our unfolding happen in a more joyful and pleasurable way.
Yeah.
Right. And part of that is making art and learning how to make money fucking doing it too.
Yeah.
So you've transitioned. Well, let me say this before we get into kind of the way you've transitioned your offering. I would say that the thing that I have found the most sustenance from you is the way that you teach, have taught, and really helped me feel into the dream space myself. And so what do I mean by that? We do all act foolish. We are tricksters to ourselves.
Yeah.
We get caught up in our arrogance. We forget that humility is confidence, but that is faith towards something. It is faith to that own inner law, that own whisper, that and sometimes we're like too caught up in our bullshit, paying our taxes, making our commute to work, whatever, checking our email, to remember that. And one of the ways that our intelligence manifests itself is through dreams.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah.
Let's talk about that for a minute, and how your own experience in the dream world has helped you see your own bullshit.
Yeah, this is such a good question. So I was a hardcore atheist for a long time. I would, if there was anyone around me who would claim to believe in God, I would make it my mission to make them cry. I sucked. I fucking sucked. And when I got to college, it's a long story, but I ended up going to a private Southern Baptist university in Texas. And so I had plenty of people to argue with. And then I eventually got into psychedelics, and then I kind of broke my brain with psychedelics. But even after having done mushrooms and LSD and DMT, a collective probably 20 plus times in the course of like 2 to 3 months. I was still a materialist atheist, which is insane to say, but that's how stuck I was in it. And I was like, this is just stuff that happens to perception when the brain is saturated with these chemicals. It's all material, baby. Mm-hmm. And then through a series of unfortunate events, I got into journaling because my life completely fucking fell apart around me. And this is when I was like 23. And through journaling, with the intention to tell myself the truth every day, I very quickly realized that I was a motherfucking coward with my partner, that I was a bad friend because I wasn't honest with any of my friends, and that I had an abusive relationship with my body. And I realized all that shit in like 12 days of journaling for like half an hour to an hour with the intention to tell myself the truth. And I started to make choices, and I started to change behaviors, and I started to tell people the truth. And I think that like kind of amplified the grace at my back, and I stumbled into my first reading of Carl Jung. And I remember reading Man and His Symbols and just being like, what the fuck is this dude talking about? And then I started, for the first time in my life, I started having dreams that I could recall that were wild. And then I would start to use some of the like techniques in this book, because the whole, like, if you don't know anything about Jung, because this was before it became cool to know his name, like this was, 12 years ago.
I love that it's cool to know his name, by the way.
Yeah, it's very cool. That is now cool. Yeah. 100%. He got into the zeitgeist, dog. But so I started, the thing I was about to say is, if you don't know anything about Jung and you start to read, like, for example, Man and His Symbols, it's like reading like a book that's channeled where someone you don't know is telling you like, this is actually what Jesus was doing, like, it's just like, why is this person so confident and why is this so compelling? Like that's kind of the way it felt to me.
Yeah, well, it's channeled, but also from a very well-respected professor of analytical psychology who had his entire own school of Jungian analysts, sure. Right? And who was one of the most highly regarded intellectual minds of the 20th century 100%. In the West, if not of all time in the West.
100%. And so I started, and like the thing that was so cool about it is you can start running the experiments. And that's something I really like about dream work. That is also why I'm really attracted to things like Vipassana and Vajrayana Buddhism, is that you can run experiments today based off of the teachings and just see what happens from running these experiments. So I started working with my dreams, and I started having wild dreams, and I then started to learn how to track synchronicities, and I started tracking synchronicities, and I had a very, like, I won't go into the whole story because I've told it other places, but I had a mundane and sober encounter with a apple in the middle of the road at like 2 p.m. on a Tuesday in the summer in Texas, and I had the instantaneous reframing of my worldview where the synchronicity of the apple was so intense that I had an instantaneous somatic attunement to there being another conscious observer who was in on the joke, who was the orchestrator of the joke, who was also then interested in my giggle at the joke. Like there was a intense intimacy. And this was all like in the flash of a moment. There was no language. It was completely somatic. And it was so totalizing that it instantly felt like a self-violation to try to gaslight it with skeptic logic.
Yeah. It would be the betrayal of your deepest lover, actually, to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And anybody who walks with God, like, let's just say it, like we walk with God. Whatever this universe is, if anything can be called divine, it's the infinite beauty of the world we live in.
Yeah, and the thing that's interesting is my dharma is such that I have family members who I care about deeply, who are very smart, who have read a lot of books, who could not disagree harder with what you just said, which is also like, and so every Christmas and every Thanksgiving, it eventually comes down to somehow I'm defending God to this very smart family member. And I'm like, how did we get here?
Yeah.
Where I'm the one that's because like where I sit with it is their argument would be like, this is not beautiful. This is fucking wrong. Like the amount of pain. And then, you know, all of the citations that everyone knows that you can make. And my response is like, the God I believe in is not a watchmaker God who has made a story and we're all just plotting through this already known structure. The God that I attune to is like whatever the energy is that is carrying the wave, that's like the divine leela, like the dance of the continuation of the wave of life, and how it's cohering everything and it's infused through everything that blinks and yawns and flutters its wings and all that shit. But it doesn't know the next moment. It's in radical like curiosity with like because it's bestowed choice.
Yeah.
That there is this inherent jazz with the next moment.
And the despair from which the question of theodicy arises. Theodicy is the question of if there is a God that is omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent, why is there such deep suffering? Shit is fucked up and bullshit. What's up with that? God, you say you're love. And what is so compelling about the way you're speaking of God is God's being is in becoming. God is along for the jazz with us. And there is also, well, I think that what the world will be already exists in one level of the mind. But God also seems to set aside God's omniscience for the sake of our ability to actually have a role and not just be the automaton set up by the watchmaker.
Right. I think a thing that appears obvious to me is that if there is a conscious point of view that is omnipotent, then there is not choice. And the type of linguistic dances that people will do to be like, no, we both have choice. And there is a all-knowing point of view. It seems like, what's the right way to word this? It seems like someone who hasn't designed a game is trying to, you know, talk about like, no, it totally works. And it's like, well, let's try to build it. And if we try to build it, it's like, let's just take the, and so we don't need to go down that rabbit hole unless you want to. And so for me, like, my God would be heretical if I was alive during the Inquisition. But my God, to me, is also heretical in 2026 in the egregore of materialistic science. You know, like, I definitely believe more than the atheists, and I definitely believe in something less conveniently, paternally comforting than the type of religions that oversaw, you know, the Inquisitions. You know, and so
they weren't that comfortable. It was the Inquisition, after all. I think they made a lot of people uncomfortable. And yeah, there's a way in which, the egregores do become devouring Moloch-like entities. At the same time, I think of Jung's name for his god was chance. Mm-hmm. And there is a chance in the world. And
it's really worth considering, like, what does that, like, what type of heretical mimetic bomb is Jung dropping into modern consciousness to say that his God's name is chance? Because if you believe in an omnipotent, omnipotent God, you know, is chance only in the eye of the beholder, or is chance a existential, ontological, like, trickster?
So, okay, so there's a couple of things there, right? So I think we need to talk about the objective psyche. So, first of all,
I don't even know what that is.
yeah, we'll get there. Four things: omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience, right? So omnipotent is all powerful, omnipresent is everywhere, omniscient is knows all, and then omniperspectival is one that I think we need to keep in mind, right? Because back to the fact that we are all instantiations of whatever is, whatever word you want to call it, with our own unique perspective that is part of the unicity of being. We're a uniquity.
Okay? That's cool.
Yeah, I coined that.
Nice.
So none of us clearly is omniperspectival as an embodied human. There is some intelligence that does perhaps see from every angle, right? But that's just the allness. Okay? Yeah. That is what is. That is the ontos, right? But the omniscience, coming back to the objectiveness of psyche, there's conscious psyche and there's unconscious psyche, right? And so unconscious feels like it has its own kind of knowledge, but it's kind of a Taoist knowing unknowing.
Break that down for me.
There is, it seems like, so take Jung's answer to Job. I mean, Job is really the question of the Odyssey.
Yeah.
Right? And sure. What Jung, I wish I had the passage memorized, but, you know, in answer to Job, ultimately Jung concludes something like God has set aside God's omniscience precisely for the purpose of allowing chance unfoldings that are acausal, in that they're chance, but they seem to lead to synchronicities. You have this thing called cause and effect, and then you have this thing called synchronicity, which is an acausal principle. And so it's the magic of how something like miracles tend to arise, right? But not in a way that anybody knows is going to happen. Does that land a little more? I know that's a bit, there's a lot more that you could break down in that.
Yeah.
But I suppose what I'm trying to like circle back to is we're all creating our own myth at every moment. A lot of us are unconsciously just living into stories that we don't even realize is our programming. Because part of the path of reclaiming your own attention is understanding, coming to see those habitual patterns that you were alluding to before, because you are what you do, right? That's like what's the habits? What atomic habits, right? Very true. You are what you do. And also, you can train your attention so that you recognize the programming that has brought you to where you are today is now limiting, and you need to up-level your basis of operations.
Yeah.
Right? That's the mind training path. So could we maybe shift to how you feel like artists in particular, because let me just reframe, like just kind of bring us back to what some of the things you talked about earlier. There is a lot of horror.
Yeah.
It's waking people up. We clearly need a renaissance. Whatever the Western tradition has been, whatever the Eastern tradition has been, I can't speak to the East. It feels pretty robust in some ways.
For sure.
Buddhist,
For
mind
sure.
training is pretty much as badass it has ever been.
Yeah.
But the West is seemingly like a dying plant.
For sure.
And we are, though, collectively envisioning and manifesting a global culture now. Clearly, right? Artificial intelligence is going to poke holes in a bunch of egregores.
Sure. That's to put it mildly.
Yeah. But that requires, in order for us to avoid mass psychosis, us learning to train our minds collectively.
Yeah.
Collectively training our minds. So one of the things I think you did a great job in the class that I took with you, which was called Mentally Fit, was go over some of the science of mind training.
Yeah.
Right. And habit formation. And so let's kind of get into the solar power of that, as it were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I apologize to people listening who have heard me talk about this before, because this is a riff I know well, and it might sound like a regurgitation, but I'll try to weave in some new notes if I can.
Give it to a bunch of people that have never heard you before.
So the average person in our generation checks their phone between 200 and 220 times a day, and there are citations for that. It takes... If you were to get 8 hours of sleep, which the average Westerner does not get 8 hours of sleep, the average Westerner is sleep deprived, but let's say you get 8 hours of sleep, that means you're checking your phone every about 4.8 minutes. It takes roughly 20 minutes for your consciousness to fall into deep focus on any complex task. And there's no such thing as multitasking with your conscious mind. You can multitask if you can put things into your unconscious mind, but consciously you cannot multitask. What you do is you rapidly task switch. And every time you task switch, you have to reload the cognitive frame that one has to load to drop into deep focus. So if it takes about 20 minutes to drop into deep focus and the average person checks their phone every 4.9 minutes, the average person is literally perpetually distracted. And since 2012, which is when like the social media as we know it kind of came online, there is a unprecedented increase in mental health outcomes through like every dimension that we're able to measure, to a starkness that we've never seen before, that started to spike in 2012. I personally think that in the same way that we require REM sleep to stay sane, I think human cognition requires bouts of deep focus daily as like equivalently important as REM sleep.
That seems like pretty, again, well established, like in the psychological literature, like that the flow state where you are dialed in, you are locked in, you are single tasking on one thing that you actually enjoy doing, is where time ceases. It is such a beautiful experience to like look up and be like, oh my God, it's 3 hours later. And I really love everything I just wrote.
Yeah.
Or like, look at this, thing I carved.
Yeah.
Right. Whatever the case may be.
But I think most people, especially in our modern Western culture, see that as a potential vitamin they can take, as opposed to a fundamental piece of just being a human. And I think that because most people see it as an extracurricular, most people see it as like, oh, it must be nice to have that time, as opposed to viewing it like sleep. That I think the kind of like core hemorrhaging of our time right now is that we are having an attentional hemorrhaging, because almost none of us have been trained to interact with these phones, which are designed by the most powerful egregores in the history of recorded history, who are all competing with each other for making the most addicting behavior and influence predicting machines. And we put it in front of kids. And we got it often when we were teenagers. And it's a new type of fire that we need a cultural response to recognizing that these phones, like, I'm not saying it's something we should avoid, because I definitely think it's something that we are obligated to learn how to use to help the other people who are drowning in this, artificial world.
Yeah.
But like, the way people who are good with guns treats other people, how to respect guns, which is like, you never point the gun, even if it's not loaded. And like, here are all the things you learn how to do to respect the fucking power of this thing. Mm-hmm. I think we need a cultural change to how we relate to phones.
Yeah. And for people who might be hearing that and saying, how many times did I check my phone today? They can go in there, you can go in your settings and you can look and you can see, I have 7 hours a day of screen time and I picked it up 213 times yesterday. And just do the math, right? I mean, just do the math. To your point, it takes 15 minutes to get into a flow state mentally, generally. And
it takes 15 minutes to have the chance of a flow state. Yeah, because it doesn't even guarantee it.
Sure. Yeah, I think there are probably people who have done a lot of mind training who can drop into flow pretty much on command. But for most of us, it's a good 15
That's a good
minutes.
point.
But, somebody hearing that though, and like maybe it's like waking them up to, what is that doing to my mind? What would it be like if I had a phone-free Sunday, right? Which I think is an increasingly beneficial practice for a lot of people, is to set that thing aside, get off the damn phone, and get out into the body, including the body politic, the body of nature. And I think we all see the way. No, we don't all see, unfortunately, but I see sure. that the algorithm is clearly trying to make you somebody specific, right? And that would be generally a person that never questions the fact that the 40-hour work week is not a natural phenomenon, as an example. I think about business a lot because I own one, and you're thinking about business a lot because you're trying to teach artists in particular how to become their own LLCs and become their own corporations and direct their own fate.
Yeah, just to become mildly competent with money.
Let's go for really fucking competent. Yeah. Because I think that's on offer to all of us as our birthright, actually. Because it is all our birthright. It is natural for us to be highly attuned, attentive entities. We've just forgotten who we are.
For sure.
And you can see this. One of the things that's so great about Buddhism that I like, you don't need to believe anything. You just need to try it.
Run it.
Yeah. Just run the program and see what happens. And, it's actually, a real testament to, consciously or unconsciously, our society has specifically left meditation and mind training, attention training, out of the curriculum.
Yep.
Right. And it's a real shame.
Also, how to do taxes is conveniently left out of the system.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, exactly. There are a lot of things that are left out of the default mode network of education in the West that tend to make you infantilized, dependent, and really disconnected from your own body and soul's calling.
I really need to memorize this because this is like the 5th time now that this quote has popped up in my head in a conversation in just like the last 2 weeks. And so for people who want to go find the quote, this is a man who was a part of a think tank that was explicitly responsible for creating what is now known as the public education system. I wish I could remember his name, but he has a quote that was published in the papers about their intention with the public school system. And I remember when this was first read to me, it made me cry. And then when I reread it on my own, it made me it was one of the things that has made me the most angry of anything I've ever read in my life. And I can psychoanalytically unpack why it was so disruptive for me. But this was a man that was basically saying, almost verbatim, we are not creating the next generation of philosophers or politicians or inventors or scientists or great artists, because we are those. We don't need more of those. we are creating the next generation of working class. And the way he words it is even more inflammatory than how I just said it. Like, I undersold how he said it.
When was this quote from?
Over 100 years ago.
Okay, I figured. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
One of the things that has been really interesting is, so like, for example, just to close the loop there, the public education system, being as bad as it is not a conspiracy. You just have to learn how to be 1% above and competent at historical reading. You just have to go read the motherfucking documents.
So like my kids frankly go to public education, but public school. And
I did.
Yeah, I did too. And look, there are a lot of teachers. It's not to say anything about anybody in those programs. There are really loving people that are doing their best, but the actual history of public education was that it was a way of teaching kids to sit still for 8 to 10 hours a day, do what they are told to prepare them for life in the factory or office environment.
I saw a great meme the other day where it was like it was a post on X, and the top photo was of Plato and Aristotle under the big archway, that famous painting, and it was like the point of school, or the point of education, in like 200 BC to cultivate virtue, and then like in 1000 AD to cultivate virtue, in the 1300 to cultivate virtue, and then 1990 and beyond to prepare your readiness for college and employment. And so it's like,
we'll get to virtue someday, but not yet. Well, and of course, I mean, our society has some virtues, I suppose, but we seem to be quite off the path of.
We have a lot of beautiful virtues at the bedrock of Western culture
100%.
that are just absolutely gorgeous. And like, one of the things that I love the most about the Western ethos is this idea of this is why I end up having to defend God at Christmas every year, is that I fundamentally believe in that the firmament thread of reality is akin to the good, the true, and the beautiful.
Yes.
But it's not omnipotent. Like, that's at least my worldview, because in my opinion, because Jung had a bunch of things that he said that he was like, this doesn't get to be released until 50 years after I die. And then he had things that were allowed to be released during his age. And I think he was being as heretical as his soul could get his ego to be. But his ego was still hedging his bets when he talked about God set aside his omnipotence to allow man to have free will.
I don't think that was, I don't think it was, God set aside his omnipotence for Christians in the kenotic. You know what the word kenosis means?
No.
Kenosis. It's an ancient Greek word. It's the emptying of God in the crucifixion of the Christ. God empties God's self out to make room for the world. Right? I mean, if you're a, omnipotent, omnipresent being, like, you got to make room for others, And so there is a sense in which...
Does that imply that there wasn't free will before the crucifixion?
No, it's not about free will or not. I don't really think the emptying of God, it is, I guess. So let's say this. Yes, free will is in the garden. I mean, in the biblical story anyway, we are children playing in the garden.
Also, quick question for you. I'm just super curious. When I read Genesis as a kid, I was struck by God 2 times when he's talking to Adam and Eve, says we or us when he's referring to himself.
Yeah.
What the who's us?
Well, the Elohim is generally in Hebrew, I think always maybe in Hebrew, I am at the end is plural. So Elohim is like the council of the gods. Yeah, and that's a whole rabbit
That
hole
is-
we could get into.
I remember being a kid and being like, who the fuck is God's friend?
Let us make God in our image, or make man in our image.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let us make God in our image is the default way that we do things as unconscious humans. That's, what Feuerbach said, back in the 19th century, is that, what we tend to do is look at ourselves and then project that outward into the universe and call that God. And the thing about being created in the image of God, that doesn't mean we look like God as much as we look out
as God.
As God.
There's a great quote by C.S. Lewis that just like, it is like such, I wish I could remember it exactly, because it's such a beautiful head nod to Buddhism as well. But it's like, God is not the sun. God is that in me which sees the sun. And like, it's like that to me is such a beautiful articulation of, I guess I'm a hard dude to pin down because I definitely upset like the people in my family who, I'm like, I don't believe in the Christian male, Yahweh. Like, I think, have you read the book by Father Sean O'Leary called Setting God Free?
No.
Masterpiece. He's a Irish by descent, and he's a priest, and he's been an ordained practicing priest for a long time, Catholic. And he wrote this book where he basically, it is such a masterpiece, but the huge main chunk of the book is that he's prosecuting Yahweh. Like, he's a lawyer and he is prosecuting, like, he is using the Old Testament to lay forth the sins of Yahweh. And basically what he gets to is the God he believes in is not Yahweh. And the God he believes in is the God that Christ taught, and like, what Christ represented and the words of Christ, and that the Yahweh God is the greatest genocidal murderer in the history of history. But what he so masterfully does is that the like 120 pages of him going in on Yahweh is to totally de-armor all of the atheists who read that book. Because by the end of his accusations of Yahweh, even the most stringent atheist is like, damn, Father Sean O'Leary made a better case against God than even I could. And then the way he ends the book is, by the time you get to the book, you're like, oh my God, I see God and I love God and I am God and I am a part of God and I'm participating in God's dream.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
yeah.
But I don't think that God's a dude, who
no.
kills millions of people because, they didn't listen.
I mean, yeah, it's not to cast aspersions on Yahweh, but there is a pretty strong historical record that like Yahweh was also, a tribal god of sorts.
Not of sorts. You're being super nice.
I'm being kind, I guess. But yeah, but the reality is it's also developmentally humanity is going through a process.
For sure.
And the tribalism that is a lower tier of development produces tribal gods, right? And, it's like the transcend and include, right? So I want a tribe, I want a tribe of people that, we understand like a beautiful rendition of God, and we're instantiating in our common life together, right? That's what this is about. Because we are all creating our gods, and being created by God every moment of every day. I want to come back though to something you started to talk about that I think would be fruitful, and that was the virtues of the West,
Yeah.
as you understand them. And so give a little background to kind of tee up this part of the conversation. But first time you and I ever actually sat down, hung out, talked, like at length, we talked about Jung, of course. We talked about dreams. We talked about past lives and all kinds of things of that sort. And I told you to check out a book by a guy named Peter Kingsley on Carl Jung called Catafalque. And Peter Kingsley, for those who have never read his work, is a scholar of the ancient world. He has several wonderful books. Probably his most popular is Reality. That has Eckhart Tolle on the back of it on a blurb. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's so cool.
Yeah. But, and what Kingsley does, I think, is really important work at reminding us the sacred origins of Western culture. And so I'm just going to tee it up like for you from there, kind of when you think about the virtues of the West, that you're like, okay, wherever we're going as a people, whatever this Renaissance is that we need, this new culture that we need to create, like, how do we remember the dead, the dying culture, and receive its gifts from it that we need to carry into the future?
Yeah, man, this is a big question because there's a lot of things. So I think first and foremost, what I appreciate the most about the West is our approach to art and like drama. And like what the Greeks were doing with the plays to trigger catharsis. The fact that we had both tragedies and comedies. You know, the Renaissance itself, logic, democracy, like U.S. common law, or just the idea of law, the idea of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and that all men, all women, all humans are created equal. Like the people that come to mind are like William Shakespeare, William Blake, Michelangelo, Da Vinci, like the audacity to imagine new ideas, you know, like, but then
there's a lot to be proud of.
Yeah.
There is a lot to be proud of. And, you know, there's definitely an energy out there in the internet, let's call it, of, you know, we've also hurt a lot of people, right?
For sure.
Right? I mean, we're a couple of white guys, right? Let's face it. You know, guys that look like us came to America and, you know, did some things to people that didn't look like us and took their land, right?
But one of the
that's
things,
also part of the West.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
And you're pointing to a lot of aspects of the West that are incredibly powerful and that we need to remember.
Yeah, and like, for example, I think one of the things that is a type of like tragic horror is that the white people who came over, most of our ancestry, you know, like I'm like 90% Irish. My people were conquested by the Roman Empire, and they were genocided, and their culture was annihilated to the point where most of us who are descendants of the Irish don't even understand that we're orphans, that we have been, that genocide was brought onto our ancestors, and we don't even remember that we were savaged by whatever the quote unquote empire was that, you know, continues now. And it wasn't until I was like 32 and I was I was about 31, I think. And I was at a concert, and the woman who was singing was an Irish musician who took the time to tell these stories and then sing in between. And it fucking shattered me. I was like, my ancestors were so completely colonized that I grew up most of my life relating to an egregoric abusive father, believing he was my father. And that is the truth for most quote unquote white people, is that our indigenous history has been so, it just happened longer ago. And we have complete amnesia about like where we came from and who our forefathers were, what our myths were, what our rights were. Like, there are documented historical cases where before Rome conquested like the Irish world, that the Druids, which were the Renaissance men and women of Ireland, they would come to Rome to advise Rome on like really important matters. And that was going on for a couple of generations. And then, without getting too deep into the details, but it's something I could riff on if you're interested in, Rome decided like, these advisors represent something that's too strong. We're going to go destroy the Druidic order. We're going to destroy their myths. We're going to raise their crops. We're going to destroy their temples and just motherfucking eradicate.
Empire is the logic of fear, ultimately. And yeah, so empire has infected the West just as it infected the East. It runs through every human heart.
Yeah.
It really does. And, you know, one of the aspects that you spoke to, you know, the abusive father. Like men have created a lot of pain. The role of the father has created a lot of pain. But the father is not an aspect of culture. It's a structure of humanity. There are fathers. Everybody is the son or daughter of a father, just as everybody is the son or daughter of a mother, right? And actually, in the answer to Job, the ending, you know, part of Jung's, where he comes to, because ultimately the question of theodicy, the discomfort we have with God is, you know, it's like Fight Club. Our fathers were our models for God, and our fathers fucking abandoned us. So what does that tell you about God? You know, and that's a wound. It's a deep, deep wound in our psyche. But also, just as, you know, the sacred mothers that birthed our Western culture and reproduced it over and over and over again in human bodies, our Western culture was also started by very powerful men that were prior to people like Socrates and Plato that Peter Kingsley talks about. And I want to talk about those for just a second, just to kind of like level set for people that are listening. So there are a couple of pre-Socratic philosophers that Kingsley really hones in on.
And the fact that we call them pre-Socratic, I think, is such a little hint into the success of the coup
100%
that Plato and Socrates and Aristotle were able to do.
Yep, 100%. But you know, Plato wrote the Republic. They're obviously incredibly important. So it's but Parmenides, Empedocles, and what Kingsley helps readers, including scholarly readers, who he is as scholarly and well versed as any,
for sure,
see is that these men were what were called iatromontuses, and that was something like a healer, prophet, priest, king, lawgiver, all in one. And you know what that sounds like? Every sovereign individual man, when they really have tapped into their power. To me, you know, not everybody's going to structurally be that in society, but you know, part of the promise and logic of democracy is that you are a king in your own castle, whether that castle is your home or your your own body.
Yeah.
Right. And do you feel like, I feel like this is a good time to talk about fog, actually. Because we're in a fog, collectively. We men are definitely in a fog. We don't know where the fuck we're going. Most of us don't live from the neck down.
For sure.
We're disassociated from our bodies. And, you know, women, I think on net, are listening to their bodies a little more closely than we men for obvious biological reasons, as well as safety reasons. You know, like we can kind of afford to be a little dissociated, and, you know, we might not be attacked because we're big, you know, men. But that's not always the case of women in a violent society, right? And so men, I think increasingly as we start to tap into our bodily intelligence, we come to realize our bodies keep the score just as much as the women's do.
For sure.
And we are deeply traumatized.
Yeah.
Because our abusive fathers were abused by their fathers. Mm-hmm. And that's our karmic inheritance. And we've all... we are clearly, as men, just as the Romans in your story eventually said to the Druids, we don't want you here anymore. You're too powerful. We're afraid of you. That's what we're trained into as men today. That's why our education system is the way it is. We don't actually want virtuous men. Virtuous men are like Odysseus, you know, like the founding myth, you know, the founding hero story of the West, in a way, is the Odyssey.
For sure.
And you've written about Odysseus tying himself to this mast.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean for you?
Yeah, so one of my favorite parts of the Odyssey is when Odysseus is with his crew on his ship and they're about to pass where the sirens are famously known to sing their song. And the legend is that no one has heard their song and survived, because when you hear their song, you lose your mind, you lose your will, you jump off the ship and you swim to them as fast as you can, and you either drown or when you make it to them, they rip you apart. Mm-hmm. And so Odysseus, being like, his superpower is that he's clever. Like that's kind of like his gift, is that he's clever in a way where he can trick the gods, or like the half gods. And so what he does is he tells his men to tie him to the mast of the ship and to stuff all of their ears with beeswax, and to not undo him until they can't see the rock formation anymore. And so they tie him up and they all put in their beeswax, and he gets to be the first and only man to hear the song of the sirens and not kill himself in response to it. But depending on what reading of the story you have, like, I don't know if he's grateful he did it, because he survived it, but it was like an absolute psychosis, wanting to die, wanting to rip himself apart, etc. And there's a couple of ways to look at that mythically. The practical way to look at it is to bind yourself to a standard that doesn't allow you to do something that everyone else does, and to like reap the mana of like leadership that comes from holding a new standard. And I think that's the pragmatic way of looking at it. I think the more intensely mythic way to look at it is to be a visionary artist, which is what I ultimately aspire to be, you know, as like an egoic thing trying to play this game, is you have to be willing to look into the abyss that Nietzsche talked about, like beware fighting with monsters before you too become monsters. And the other translation or the other part of that quote is, he who stares long enough into the abyss, he finds that the abyss stares back. Mm-hmm. I think, especially in our modern time, with what appears to be the descent into the event horizon of a technologic singularity in juxtaposition with a rise in existential risks, that to look over the mast, like to look over the bow of the ship and to see what's coming, is to look at something horrifying. But it's only those who are willing to look at the horror that will have the capacity to reorient the ship.
Well, absolutely. And looking into the abyss, looking into the horror, back to your own writing, it wakes you up.
I think so.
It can. And when you do wake up to it, really fucking wake up to it, like Odysseus, he was awake. He didn't sleep through it. But ultimately, after that ordeal is another ordeal. Yeah. And ultimately, though, I think Odysseus risks the psychosis, and all of us risk psychosis by remembering who we are. Because to remember who we are is to recognize how much we have forgotten. I know you're fond of the Joseph Campbell quote, right? The difference between, the mystic and the psychotic is, you actually probably say it better, but the difference between the mystic and the psychotic is essentially one learns to swim in the ocean that the other drowns in, right? And Odysseus ultimately, though, he comes back home and reclaims the kingdom, and back to education and virtue. That is the education that we need, is how to take the kingdom back, And the kingdom is always already right here, because as Christ said, the kingdom is within. It is our heart to reclaim. We are reclaiming our hearts, actually, as men. And so I started talking about fog, and then we went into, I think, a very good territory. But a lot of men are looking at that abyss, depression, the statistics. How many soldiers kill themselves in our country every year? 25,000, something like that. Addiction, not just to these phones, but to all kinds of other substances. Men have created a lot of chaos, hurt a lot of people, but hurt people. And as a man, as you have had the foggy periods of your life, and I'm thinking of fog because there's a new book out by Jim Collins, What to Make of a Life. And I know from talking to you, you and I both heard the Tim Ferriss episode with Jim Collins, right? And in that, he's talking about encodings, which kind of line up with the daimon in your language. And then he talks about cliff moments, which are something like thresholds, initiations. But between those two things is the fog. And the fog is when we recognize we're lost, that we are who we thought we were is clearly not who we are, but who we are to become is also not yet clear. And so, what do you feel for men in particular are some of the most important practices or framework for walking in the fog today?
Yeah, so first, it feels right to admit that my orientation hasn't ever been like men or women. The Buddha wasn't doing men's work. He was, it was for everyone, because we all suffer from the same fundamental delusion. But so
I'd welcome you broadening it out to women too.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm only going with men because we were talking about like the abusive father aspect. But yeah, feel free to open it up.
But so with that said, you know, I'll try to feel into like specifically for men, what feels like more honest to say is, instead of, you know, talking about what I think men should do, talking about what I have felt myself called to do as I've matured into what I hope to be, you know, a male adult. And I think the first one is recognizing the spell I was casting on myself because of how filled with shame I was and how truly incompetent I actually was, that I hid behind a false bravado and a type of pseudo competence because I could capture people's attention with the way I spoke. And like all through high school, what I would do, the more uncomfortable I felt with the material of the class, the more I would co-opt the teacher's attention to basically have like a debate with me in class. And because I was able to do that with most teachers, by the time I graduated high school, I thought I was hot shit. And when I hear the word arrogance, I hear my name, you know, and like I was the epitome. I was the epitome of arrogance. And my first like real developmental wake up moment was when I started college and I failed all my classes because the classes were too big. I wasn't able to capture the teacher's attention. And I realized that I didn't know how to study. I didn't know how to try. And so I failed all my classes and I was in full shame. I thought I was going to be expelled. And then I had my first wake up call, which was precipitated by some marijuana. I think marijuana is particularly helpful to type A men because it has like an inherent feminine kind of, almost like, the way I describe it to myself is marijuana helps me remember how vulnerable I actually am. Mm-hmm. That like really opens up a lot of things in me that I can suppress when I'm in my masculine ego. And the big insight that I had was like, holy shit, I don't know anything useful. I have to completely change my relationship to life and become a voracious student. And so then after that day, the very next day, I shaved my head and I drove 36 hours from Texas to Washington State. And I spent the entire summer reading philosophy and reading philosophy and psychology and working out every day and not talking to any of my friends that were not their fault, but they were basically all toxic relationships because they were the people that I was friends with because we had the same coping patterns to, you know, be in the fog. And then I basically got straight A's in college and was able to take enough extra classes to graduate on time. So I never had to actually tell my parents that I failed my entire first year and I stopped going to my classes and I almost got expelled. And then the next big wake up call was recognizing like, wow, the world doesn't give a fuck that I have a degree. I'm going to have to play a game to have the type of life that I want. And that's when I first opened up my mind to be an entrepreneur. And for men, for me, the big like change moment was a couple of years ago, recognizing, yo, I'm telling this woman that I'm in love with that I want a family with her, and I have not demonstrated almost any skills that would show that she should trust me to make herself vulnerable by becoming pregnant, because I hadn't taken the time to renegotiate reality in such a way where I knew how I was making money. Like the big thing for me, and this might resonate with other men here, but if I'm being honest with myself, I do not want any other man to be able to tell me that I have to be somewhere instead of being with my kids if I want to be with my kids. And that does, like, that lights a fucking fire in my heart where it's like, I will learn what I have to learn when it comes to like money, and when it comes to creating a business, and when it comes to playing the game inside of this egregore that we call the US economy and taxes and all that bullshit, where no man can tell me that I have to be in a room with him instead of being at my kids' like, then being with my kids if they had to go to the hospital.
Yeah.
It's like, no, fuck you. And fuck you to me. Like, we will not put ourselves in a position where that's the situation. And so I think, especially in our time right now, as we're watching the collapse of the American dream that we were promised when we were, you know, children of the 90s, where most men that I saw when I was growing up, the heroic thing to do was to basically kill your soul so you could go work at a corporation for 20 plus years so you can provide a living wage for your family so you can then retire and, you know, hope that that company continues to pay whatever percentage.
Yeah.
And that shit's gone. And if it's not completely gone with the technological singularity of what AI will be doing to a lot of these jobs that people are hoping will last so that they can have their pension or whatever the thing is, a lot of that's not going to last. But just to close the point on this real quick, it feels like, for me, when I look at this world, the current call of being like a provider and a protector is that I have to learn how to create egregores. I have to learn how to contend with egregores, and I have to learn how to be of service to other people in such a way where within this capitalistic system that we are in, I can have the type of resources where my wife can get pregnant. She can be with the child in the way that she feels called to, and that she doesn't have to, you know, submit herself to, you know, like a $20 an hour type job. And not to degrade that for anyone.
No.
But the task I've set upon myself is I want to be able to, I think the equivalent of 100,000 years ago, being able to, like, you know, protect your family from a wild animal. The version of that now in our current culture is, can you pay your taxes and pay your mortgage?
Yeah. So I think that, you know, you said that the soul crushing kind of giving one's life over to a large corporation is I'm gonna say that it's very much not gone. I go to conference centers that have like tens of thousands of men in them, and they're all still working. And so part of the dynamic of having a mythos and recognizing that we are all living into a mythos. I think part of the initiation of men is, yeah, we have to, there is a lot for us to do. We are going to be co-creators, but there are all the egregores, the structures, the collective thought forms of the kingdom renaissance that we all want to live into, they already exist.
Say more.
And I think that when a person is aligned, back to our earliest part of the conversation, part of the unfolding of the encoding is us getting out of our own way. Actually, and insofar as we are that obstacle, that then itself becoming the way. It's about lining up so that what already is, one can just work through you as a vessel.
Do you have an example in your own life?
I mean, I think actually I learned it from you. The fact that I'm sitting here doing this podcast with you.
I see.
you know, it's not a, it's a very ordinary process. We're just two guys sitting around talking, you know?
Yeah. We just have mics now. Yeah.
We're sitting around the fire. And I think that there's a, I think what is here, I'll just tell you how what I feel in the spiritual business kind of community that you and I have kind of collaborated in. I feel like energetically, a lot of men and women have started to recognize the importance of actually relaxing into one's own body and letting it tell you what you need to hear. That's the processing of our collective trauma. Because ultimately what we're talking about with Empire is our collective trauma.
For sure.
And from there, you start to learn to listen to your dreams. You start to work with the magic of the goodwill. And ultimately, you're coming into your own heart. And that is going to cohere your thought structures in a way that is very lucid and clear.
Yeah.
And when you start to think clearly and have a heart open to connection with everything, making friends with all of those parts in yourself that you met when you recognized all the anxiety and fear in your body.
Yeah.
And as you make friends with those parts of yourself, you become more integral, you become more whole. And then you start to make friends with other people. And before you know it, you have more friends than you know what to do with. And all of a sudden, now you're back at a point of, okay, like I literally can't talk to all 1,800 of my followers. And you recognize like, okay, I got to make some decisions. But then that becomes a question of, well, what time is it? What is needed? There's my village. There's my house. There's me providing for my wife, my family. But there's a neighborhood, and then there's a city, and then there's the nation, and then there's the culture, and then there's the world. And so much of that working up to that place of heart coherence in our largely patriarchal society is a motherly process. It's a very feminine opening into
For sure.
the ground, right? And I think like men being able to cry, right, as an example. Yeah. And you've said a couple times here, like, and it made me cry. And like, you know, a lot of guys would be like, fucking cried, like and are afraid to admit that to themselves, right? And that's that emotional body, right? There's deep sadness.
Yeah.
You know, you can feel into it. But ultimately, though, why I think I asked the question about men and the way I asked it as men is, you know, I heard the word, you know, the abusive father, right? And we all, I think we all feel that.
Yeah.
I love my dad. He did the best, right?
Yeah, same.
But, you know, so I wrote an article recently called Yes King, Men in Hot Water. And I'll just tell the story here because I tell it there. So my grandmother recently died. She had just turned 100.
Wow.
And the better part of the last, it might have been 12, 15 years, but something like that, she had pretty severe dementia. And my dear aunt had an apartment in her basement and cared for my grandma for like the last decade of her life. And I was talking to this aunt at the funeral. And we got to talking about my grandfather, who passed probably, I want to say 2006 or 7. I should know that date maybe, but My grandfather passed some years ago. And my aunt told me this story, though. How we got to talking about him was that when my pap was a wee boy, 4 or 6 years old, his father and mother like were out of the house, and he had like 7 or 8, like 6 or 7 brothers and like 3 or 4 sisters. Big family.
Wow.
Back in the days. Croatian, had come over on the boat a generation before. So this is 1920s, 1930s. And back then, in a working class Pittsburgh home, the way you had hot water was you had a big basin in the kitchen, and you boiled water and you poured it in there, and you used it for bathing and washing and whatever you used hot water for. And my grandfather and his brother were kind of somehow tasked to watch their even littler brother, who was 2 years old. And somehow or other, that little brother fell into that tub of water and was scalded to death. And my grandfather told my Uncle Jimmy, actually, that he watched his brother's skin slough off of his body. Horror. Horror. And my great-grandfather came home and screamed and raged and blamed my grandfather. And so the abuse of the father, I think, runs through every family I've ever met, And as it turned out, as I think it turns out, like karmically, the really wild thing is my dad became a water heater salesman. And then I bought my dad's business, and I've been in hot water ever since.
Wow.
And I don't make light of that. I really do look at it as like, it's been a forge for me to be in business and to create a business where I genuinely want to people to tap into their own genius and their own gifts and step into a leadership role, But a man can be a leader, a woman can be a leader, but there is an aspect of leadership that is masculine, and there's an aspect of leadership that is feminine, and that is something like top down, bottom up, right? And those meet together in the center, where the balance happens in the heart. Okay. And so I tell all of that because my sense is that, like, in the collective, there is that resting into the ground, and like we're coming to like land in our own lives. But ultimately, like there are decisions to be made about what we give our attention to.
Right? For sure.
And that, in the Jim Collins language, is something like the cliff moments, the thresholds. So maybe we could speak to what you see as what kind of threshold we are on as a culture, as a collective. And maybe with specific reference to what our dear friend Carl would have to say about that from your perspective.
So I'll start with what I see. What I see is that the dominator culture of our time is Western culture. That our current momentum, if it's not alchemized, is almost certainly leading to near existential or complete existential death for life on this planet, either through ecological collapse, nuclear holocaust, the quote unquote democratization of genetic warfare with things like CRISPR, and then obviously the complete unknown of like AGI being in the hands of military organizations that use it, to create a new type of war that we can't even comprehend. And that, like the Joe Rogan joke where he says, like, what it felt like as a kid when you were at the grocery store and you like saw adults and you were like, you thought that there were these like people that like understood what was happening and
Somebody
how the world
knows.
worked. Like somebody knows and they're taking care of it.
Yeah.
And then one day you're at that same grocery store and the cashier calls you sir, and you realize you're 30. And you're looking around and you're like, I don't fucking know what's going on. And all of the adults that I've ever met, or, like his joke is like, and they're all dumber than me, And so there's this real moment of realizing like, it's either there's no one in the steering wheel in the driver's seat, or the person in the driver's seat is behind invisibility cloak and they're doing things that like we see glimpses of in the Epstein files that just completely break the heart, And so I think the cliff we are on is, if we have the eyes to see and the hearts that resonate with anything I just said, we are the ones who are responsible for starting to dream about the next generation and starting to orient ourselves to the next generation and to the next couple of generations, and asking ourselves the question, what do we have to become to give the next generation a better starting point than we have? Like, I think ultimately what I resonate most with as a man is with the quote, great men are those who plant trees whose shade they know they will never get to sit under. Mm-hmm. And that I think there's like male adolescence is getting to the point where no one can tell me where I have to be. Like that ultimately is the fulfillment of the dream of the adolescent.
Ego strength is important.
For sure, 100%. But then I think the evolutionary step beyond that is to embrace what it means to be a father. And it's not just literally biologically being a father, which is obvious to people, but psychologically being a father in the sense of you are now orienting to the next generation as something that's fundamentally more important than you. But it's an include and transcend. It's not a martyr yourself to try to, no, it's part of the next generation is you as a mentor. I think a fundamental thing for men and for women is to, once you have reached that adolescent cliff where you can see the top of the mountain and it's like you've established some type of domain mastery where you're recognized and being, like for you, it's having grown the business to the point where you can now replace yourself, like that's the top of a mountain. And I think it's the top of the adolescent mountain that most spiritual people have completely abandoned even trying to climb, because of their wounds with the real and also the mythic father, which is, there's a Jungian frame where there's like 4 fundamental phases of development. And the first phase is the realm of the mother. And that's basically from birth until like puberty. And it's like the function of that phase is to attune to the mythical mother in the sense of like, you are loved without any condition. You don't have to perform. You don't have to be special.
Yeah.
You don't have to beat anyone. You don't have to be better. You don't have to win. You are loved. Most of us don't get that, but that is ideally what would be happening in the first phase of life. And then to graduate to the realm of the father, which is the next phase, you have to walk away from the realm of the mother where you are completely loved without condition. And then you step into a new game, which is, I don't care who your mother is. Can you light a fire? Because we need people here who can light fires. Mm-hmm. Can you hunt? I don't give a fuck what your last name is. If you crack that twig and the game gets away, we don't get to eat tonight. And so in the realm of the Father, it's about cultivating competence, where you belong to the degree that you can contribute.
Symbolically, it's middle school.
Right. And that this is the place where in my point of view, the majority of people who identify as spiritual have opted out of even playing the game of the realm of the Father because, there's grief, there's resentment, there's pain. But then
instead they choose to aestheticize the mother. They start to wear the mother as like branding, as
and the way that I like say it in classes that really like breaks through people, like you've broken through someone's part if you can get them to laugh at a thing that they previously disagreed with. And the thing that really connects to people is we have a bunch of 25-year-olds who are trying to be Ram Dass, who are trying to be gurus, who are trying to, like a 25-year-old life coach who is quoting Alan Watts and quoting Ram Dass. And I was that. Like, I was definitely there because I didn't want to learn how to play the game.
Absolutely.
But to get to the cliff moment of the realm of the Father is to have established yourself with competence, and you have prestige, and it's earned hierarchy, it's earned competence, it's earned respect. But then the next phase after that is what they would call like the realm of the soul. And the realm of the soul is like, to get to the top of the realm of the Father, the thing that is the main character in the game of your life is your ego, because it's the thing that's acquiring competence. Mm-hmm. Once you get to the realm of the soul, you have to learn how to change the magnetic poles of your own inner life from the ego being the main character to the soul being the main character. And then the ego that you developed in the realm of the Father becomes the emissary to the soul. And then this is where you start to learn how to like listen to your dreams. This is where you start to learn how to, instead of doing your routine because you had a whim, you go do something that doesn't make any sense. This is where the fog really comes in on purpose.
Could I speak to maybe put it in a because before you go talking about dreams and various practices, I feel like in the Lojong tradition, like mind training, this is moving from the identification with the ego to the identification with awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
But go on.
Yeah, and so for most people in Western culture, the realm of the soul is going, like we call it a midlife crisis, we call it psychosis, we call it burnt out, we call it chronic disease. Like our culture has a bunch of names for it because our culture still, the predominating egregores in our culture don't believe we have souls. Like the predominating egregores of Western culture, especially when it comes to the mental health institution, which is like the thing that absolutely breaks my heart is that the etymology of psychology is the study of the soul. Mm-hmm. The etymology of being a psychiatrist is a healer of the soul. Mm-hmm. But our current psychological and psychiatric models don't believe in souls.
So the soul is the realm of the imaginal as well, and that is where the egregores are come up with. That's where they get their juiciness. Mm-hmm. And the irony, tragic irony of the predominating egregore thought structure that comes from soul is that we don't have soul.
Yeah.
And so we're dissociated, disconnected.
And so for many people who are in the realm of the soul, if they're not if they're not exposed to indigenous and occult / mystery egregores, the entire phase of the realm of the soul is pathologized in our culture. And it's pathologized in such a way where you're encouraged to like basically become a PhD in gaslighting yourself and suppressing your own whisper with pharmaceutical help. And this isn't to say that there isn't a time and place for some pharmaceuticals, because there are, but most pharmaceuticals, most what are called antipsychotic meds, so antidepressants, anti-anxiety, anti-psychosis, none of those are built to be taken for the rest of your life. And there's great research on this that it is an improper use of any of these medications for you to take them for the rest of your life.
Sure.
And so the realm of the soul is ultimately what Carl Jung calls, we have two kind of distinct storytellers in our consciousness, and he called it, one is the spirit of the times, and the other one is the spirit of the depths. Your ego is basically the spirit of the times. It's the one.
Personality one.
Right.
Yep.
But the spirit of the depths doesn't give a fuck about your prestige, doesn't give a fuck about your reputation, doesn't give a fuck about, oh, someone else is already doing this thing out in the culture and they're so much more successful than me. Your soul doesn't give a fuck. Your soul is like this spiritual compass that starts knocking, and it starts imposing upon you spontaneous images and impressions of new things to do, things that make you want to vomit when you imagine it. Like, oh my God, I can't leave my job. Oh my God, I can't tell my partner this thing I haven't told them. Oh my God, I can't, confront my children and apologize for not being present. Like whatever the thing is that the soul starts to knock on. But then what Carl Jung doesn't, what Jungians don't say, but what I think Jung showed with himself and confessed through the Red Book, and I came up with this fourth one before I read Catafalque, but now reading Catafalque completely validates this fourth stage. But I think there's a fourth stage, and the fourth stage is the realm of the prophet, which is once you learn how to attune to soul and you learn how to live a life where your soul basically gets to be the director and your ego is now the emissary, you will make yourself available to visionary dreams that if you then use the ego that you cultivated in the realm of the Father, you can, like the ego that was cultivated in the realm of the Father is like the forge master. It's like the one that can beat the blade, but it's the soul that you cultivated in the realm of the soul that's able to like catch the comet that goes into the forge. And then once you have mastery at crafting the, comets that your soul catches, every once in a while, you'll produce a genuine piece of visionary art that is like a Black Swan event, either onto yourself or onto your local community, and sometimes even for the larger culture. And I think that is ultimately the fulfillment of the prophet healers that were the true forefathers of Western culture. And the thing that I put out to the people who pay attention to me is this fourth realm is something that anyone who is hearing what I am saying is obligated to cultivate themselves to be able to do.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's beautiful imagery. It's a really helpful framework. I'm a father. I have 5 daughters. And I feel like part of that father stage is how that fog, because that is the fog. I feel like that's where the fog is for us collectively right now, is in that father stage. Is how do we have a healthy masculine energy to build the world we all want to see? Because we need the masculine energy too, clearly.
For sure.
The feminine energy ain't going to get us there by itself.
For sure.
I love matriarchy, but patriarchy, the rule
alchemical marriage,
the rule of the father, the rule of the mother, alchemical marriage, the union of the sacred union. And, hey, America's a sacred union. At least we used to think that. But you learn to laugh at yourself as a father. If you don't, you're going to have a rough go of it. Because it is going to teach you in every possible fucking way all of your unhealed parts, all of the things that trigger. I mean, I've made a lot of strides as a father over the years, but as a young man, my 4-year-olds would make me angry. Well, that doesn't say anything about the 4-year-olds. That says a lot about your unhealed 4-year-old parts as a grown-ass man.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, you have to learn to laugh at yourself.
For sure.
And then the step from there into the realm of the soul is you learn you're the cosmic joke also. But it's interesting that you go to the realm of the prophet as the last, because we've now done, this is our second podcast episode, and here we are talking about prophecy both times.
Of course.
But in that last time, I said to you, speaking truth to the present. And I think what I probably meant to say even more is speaking truth to power, right? Dr. King was a prophet.
For sure.
He was a great American prophet.
For sure.
And he spoke truth to power. And one of the Dr. King quotes I think that we really need to sit with as a people is something to the effect of, the people of goodwill need to get as organized as the people of ill will, And
those who love peace must learn to organize as well as those who love war.
There you go. But that's the war of love right there, because, one of the things, kind of the question I was circling around in my mind was, how do you distinguish between fog as pathology, fog as, you're just lost, and fog as initiation?
One of my favorite quotes, and I forget where I heard this from. It may have been, what's his name? The Jungian psychologist that Peter Kingsley actually doesn't like that much, but who's Hillman, where it's don't pathologize, where it would be more adaptive to mythologize. And so I think one of the interesting things to consider is that the fog is never pathological without you pathologizing it. That like, as soon as we pathologize the fog no longer gets to be the mythic invitation. Whereas the fog becomes initiatory as soon as you relate to it as initiatory. And I personally think, and for anyone listening to this who's like, who has been following my shares over the years, I think one of the most useful, study groups to get is to get Jim Collins' most recent book, which you referenced, and to read it alongside Bill Plotkin's book, The Journey into Soul Initiation. Because in my opinion, those two are talking about the exact same demonic force in our hearts. And one is coming from a deeply spiritual standpoint, and the other one is coming from a radically pragmatic business standpoint. Because Jim Collins is one of the clearest thinkers and one of the best thinkers who is currently alive on how to think about corporate egregores and how to make things that can really change the world. And I think they're talking about the same thing. And I think it's almost like the two wings of the masculine ego, where it's like, learn both of these. Yeah. Learn how this applies to making you a more competent creator deep into your old age, which is what Jim Collins is offering. But two, recognize that all of this sterilized language that is kind of like an echo of thinking like computers, and Jim Collins is a beautiful man, but he's still deeply within the modern Western materialistic,
Sure.
And I actually appreciate that about him. But then you can read Bill Plotkin's alongside that book and just see how deep the well of the fog can go if you learn how to surrender yourself to it.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that Plotkin's talks about is that the only way to get to the alchemy from the great fog stage that we all are going to meet, in the halfway part of our life, is it doesn't get to start to work on you until you surrender to being lost. And this is something that is, like a existential koan for most Western, especially masculine psyches, where it's like, yo, you solve this by giving up solving and be prepared to be here for 1 to 4 years. I think Bill Plotkin says in his book, when people enter this like great fog stage, the quickest he's ever seen someone come through it is about 2 years, but on average it's about 6.
Well, and if you think about it, just try to be as pragmatic as we can. Part of the realm of the Father is the competence.
Yeah.
And competence at one level is about controlling our own destiny.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, when you get to the realm of soul and you start to play a bigger game, that tool of control no longer serves you quite as well. And actually, I think I feel like maybe you said something about like left brain, right brain at some point today. And, the work of Ian McGilchrist, right? His work, The Master and the Emissary, right? Mm-hmm. So the right hemisphere is the, in a way, like a little bit more of a feminine principle. It's like a grander receptivity. It's a gestalt. It's like the emotions. And the left brain is very focused on the linguistic capacity. And
it puts things into boxes.
It puts things into boxes. It's what we consider rational, right? It counts. It ratios.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what McGilchrist's large point is that the emissary took over the master, the right hemisphere's duty. It arrogated to itself the master status. And so, we have words without power, words without soul, ad infinitum. I mean, at one level, LLMs maybe are the unconscious looping into existence, that dynamic in our psyche. And coming back to the realm, or initiating into the realm of the soul, is coming back into balance, recognizing that words are just words unless they're infused by divine power, and then all of a sudden they become something more like incantations and magic spells, And that soul language is where you start to learn to hear the language of dreams,
mm-hmm.
the ineffable words of the emotional body, the subtle energies and qualities of life that, we've forgotten how to sniff out. So I guess I would map that on to earlier, like kind of the heart level, right? The heart coherence. You're cohering with the soul that you are, and that soul is the all soul, and it is what connects you to everything. It's what lets you recognize that you are not separate, right? You needed that ego strength to get to where you are. You needed to differentiate. And then there's the motion back into the collective, right? And then in the prophetic, it's speaking truth to power. So it's like father rule is like will, power. The soul is love. For Jung, one of his warnings is, where people are obsessed with power, love is lacking. And, like there's like this dichotomy, right? But ultimately, the power of the prophet is the prophet's love, because the love is guided by truth, and it's speaking truth into our own power, just as much as external powers. We become prophets to ourselves. Do you feel me on that?
Yeah.
And also, we need to make sure we're mirrored back, right, by others, because none of us, because the ego's pretty tricky.
For sure. Yeah, the thing that comes to mind is like the realm of the mother is like healthy attachment, and like from that healthy attachment, all good things grow out of. And then the realm of the father is competence. Like the way that I think about it is competence is learning how to transform reality to cohere with your intention. So that like you have an intention, and for example, we all had the competence to put on our pants. Like we intended, we were able to transform the current reality of no pants to having pants. Yay. That's fundamentally what competence is the capacity to transform reality to cohere with our intention of what we want to be. And then the realm of the soul becomes the director that points our laser of competence. And that fundamentally the nature of the soul is will often almost by nature make the ego constrict a bit, where it's like, I know I could do that because I've cultivated the competence, but I don't know if I want to do that because like, how's that safe? How's that good for me? Mm-hmm. How will that incur prestige or blah, blah, blah. And then the realm of the prophet is the natural byproduct of the competent laser having bowed to the soul over enough iterations of soul inclinations that you don't know when, but every once in a while, the comet your soul brings to you that you forge into a blade, when you take it out of the forge and it cools, it's like humming. Mm-hmm. Like it's not just a blade. It's like a tuning fork that starts to like make the dirt grow plants and like makes trees bear fruit, raises people from the dead. You know, like I think like this is something that Jordan Peterson often talks about, but the upper limits of what humans are capable of is still something that's beyond our imagination. And one of the things that I love the most about what Christ said is that everything I have done, you guys will do and more. And that I think one of the like tragedies of our current popular modern reading of Christianity, of Christ, is that we safely distance Christ in the past as a thing that has been done, that we are the recipients of, and the subtext being, we don't have to risk like that. We don't have to become that because it's already been done for us. But I personally believe that whatever was in Yeshua that he made access to, and then what came forth from him because he was in attunement with that, is something that I think we are morally obligated to strive for the potential of being ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It is there to be received. I think when, in the Christian tradition, fully God, fully human, that is the Christ. That is the makeup of the Christ. And at the same time, Christ is just one person within the Trinity in the classical Christian tradition. And then with Mary being brought into the Godhead in a way in the Catholic version, it becomes something like a quaternity. And that's actually how Jung's answer to Job, in fact, was talking about that process of the Godhead bringing in, like the Catholic Church, like recognizing like the ferment within the church about Mary. It's like ultimately that needed to be reflected in the dogmatics. And you bring Mary in as like the mediatrix, the mother of God, and then you have the Christ, and you have the Spirit, and you have the Father. And what Jung then concludes is that actually then what ends up happening is you have the Son and the Father and the Spirit, and the Son, which is Yeshua, which is fully God, fully human, is akin to really the second Adam. That's what the New Testament says about Christ, is the second Adam. And in that fully God, the phrase actually is so beautiful that Jung pulls probably from the Gnostics, if I had to guess, is he is the son of the sun and the moon. That there is the solar component, the lunar component, the masculine, the feminine. And so even though it's a sun, it doesn't mean it's a man. Women are the Christ. The Christ structurally is us actually fully being human. One of the things that our friend Kingsley talks about in one of his later books after Catafalque is that humanity itself is an archetype.
Mm-hmm.
And back to the way you put it with Jordan Peterson, we do not yet know what a human body can do, let alone the human mind.
Let alone humanity.
Yeah.
We haven't seen it yet.
No. But yeah, it does feel like collectively we are in an imagining process together where we, I just think about the tools on offer, right? You're teaching, it's kind of like maybe bring us back to what your projects are and kind of look toward wrapping up. What you are teaching is, in particular with artists, people you call Dharma artists, you could just as well call them the Dharma army. Mm-hmm. But you're teaching them how to take that, the realm of the mother, the attunement to their art, to that attaching safely to their own artistic being, and then putting some structure behind it, like daddy needs you need to have the daddy energy of like filing your taxes on time and doing payroll and making it a self-sustaining business so that you can protect whatever village it is you're trying to build and be a part of. And ultimately that's looking out to the imaginal realm, the soul realm. And there you find whoever you are is an us, And here we are collectively with these tools in our hands that at the level of just a very pragmatic business reality, creating a business for yourself that makes you whatever number of dollars you need to live comfortably and guide your own time has quite literally never been easier with artificial intelligence. I mean, there was a story actually in Tim Ferriss's newsletter the other day about some guys that created a GLP-1 telehealth company. It's like $400 million in revenue with 2 dudes and a bunch of agents. Mm-hmm. What about a really talented artist that just needs $150,000 to live on a year and be fucking thrilled with their life? What kind of businesses can we create and really free humans up?
Yeah, like the way that I see it is that for the people who it's obvious to that we need a renaissance, which is most of the people who I talk to, if it's obvious to you that we need a renaissance, the thing to recognize to help build a renaissance is we need guilds that produce master artists, and we need patrons who invest huge amounts of money. Those are key components to the recipe of a renaissance. And so if you're listening and you feel as I feel and you see as I see, the question to ask is, if not you, then who? And if not now, then when? Because ultimately, if you're someone who wants to see a renaissance, but you're unwilling to learn how to create a guild, at the very least, and at the most become a type of angel investor, which both of those things would require true competence for entrepreneurship. If you're not willing to learn how to do that as a natural extension of you being an artist in 2026, you're either hoping someone else will save you. Like there's lots of artists who are like, it's an unconscious story most of the time, but it's very like Disney princess, where it's like, if I'm just a good enough artist, someone will come along and pay me so much money that I never have to worry about money. You're either hoping to be saved or you're hoping someone will do the thing that you're unwilling to do. And like, so for me, that works on me. Like if I say that to me, it's like, okay, I need to grow the fuck up and I need to learn how to do this because I really want to see a renaissance. And the truth is, like, I'm an introverted artist who would prefer to be a researcher and a writer and just read books all fucking day write my essays, drop my essays off, get some prestige from people I don't ever interact with, and just be with my family.
Yeah.
But when I confronted existential risk theory, I recognized very quickly how selfish that was. And trying to, like, to be identified as a coach is something I never wanted to be. To be in front of cameras and microphones is something I never wanted to do, because people might not be able to tell, but I live and have lived my entire life with a stutter. It's always, every time I speak, it's an effort to talk. And I do all these things because I genuinely believe that if I'm not willing to do it, then I'm a motherfucking hypocrite. And so I'm doing it. And the invitation is to the other people who hear me, like, let's grow up together while I'm in this phase of my life where this is what I'm teaching, because this will not be what I'm teaching in a couple of years. Like, as soon as it's not the forefront of my own development, I'm going to move on to new things. And so the invitation for this phase of my life is for the people who have been paying attention. Put your money where your mouth is. Come learn, and we'll do it together. And I want to help you make money, because the people who resonate with what I talk about are the disproportionately and unordinarily compassionate, kind. They want to see the world do good. Their hearts are broken by the way things look. And they just have a lot of stupid fucking stories about money, you know, and I'm happy to help them change those.
Yeah, there's a lot of wounds around money in our society. And at the end of the day, it doesn't need to have anything to do with your identity. It doesn't need it counts for nothing on the balance of infinity. And
Da Vinci had to risk imprisonment to open up cadavers to learn how to draw anatomy. We can learn how to make a fucking funnel. You know?
Yeah, I hear
it's
that.
a part of our craft is the main thing I'm trying to teach artists. It's like, in 2026, a part of your craft is to learn how to run a business. Yeah. And the thing that's nuts is that gets more triggered comments than me saying that ADHD isn't real, you know, which is nuts.
Well, it comes back to father wounds in a way, because money wounds do tend to come at the hand of the masculine principle that creates artificial scarcity, that doesn't share with the village.
Yeah, that exploits.
Yeah, it's you know, look, there are elders in our society who are elders just in the sense that they have more years to have accumulated wealth with compound interest. And there are elders in our society that...
Bill Plotkin would call those olders as opposed to elders.
Perfect. Yeah, great. Well, there's olders and there's elders. And fortunately for us who are in the position of moving from the motherly to the fatherly to the soul level, there are no shortage of elders. You know, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can we can start with practices that go back and have a very long lineage. And some of the simplest things, like learning how to breathe every day and not check your phone 200 times and relaxing into the ground, are where the deepest art pours out of anyway. You know, and we have, we're very fortunate with, you know, I just think about growing up, like the amount of information available to me. Like, you know, I was born in the 80s, in the 1990s. Like, how many books on Buddhism were really available?
Yeah.
I mean, I could literally get an education on a graduate level education on damn near any topic.
For sure.
On the internet today. And, you know, that's on offer to all of us, not only to grow up educationally and deconstruct the programming within us that told us education was about learning to sit still and listen to orders. And I'm really thankful to have you in the field and in the space as a teacher and as a partner, as a friend, as a brother, and in this world together to try to create this renaissance, because we need it. We really do. There's the time is nigh, you know. Part of that, you know, you've alluded to existential risk theory, and Anybody who's not familiar with that, they can look at the work of Daniel Schmachtenberger.
Be careful, yeah.
Be careful. And you know what? But yeah, take care. Take great care to have wide open eyes toward the world as it actually is. Because I don't think anybody who's in the spiritual space does it to bypass, right? Not consciously. And there definitely is. There's plenty of bypassing. There's plenty of, wearing it as a persona, and that's hollow. It lacks power, and it's certainly not going to make you happy long term, because you got to leave it all in the court, man.
Yeah. And thank you. And I feel the same way. And the one thing I would offer is, as weird as it is, I don't identify as a teacher, but I definitely do teach a lot. But the disposition I come from, which I think will be helpful to other people, because I'm ultimately saying everything I'm doing, I think whoever is listening is also called to do in their own way. And I think of it as gonzo journalism, where it's like anything. So one of my pet peeves are people who claim to believe in conspiracies, but then when I look at their life, their behavior does not reflect that they actually believe what they're trying to convince me of, because they're wasting their fucking life, but they're talking to me about that the moon's hollow and that it catches souls or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it's not that I disregard the conspiracy, but it's just that 99 out of 100 people who talk to me about conspiracies, are not living their life as if they actually believe it's true, and they're still wasting a lot of their time. And I think like a gonzo journalist is when you believe something, you actually live your life in a series of experiments and you report from the cutting edge of your own mistakes. And that's how I see what I do, is that I am making a mess in public and I am turning around and leaving trip reports after every experiment. And I have no fucking idea how this is going to turn out. Like I sometimes think like, damn, I'm really cutting a pretty fat check for myself, that if I'm 80 and I don't see massive X, Y, and Z, I'm going to have to live with the hypocrisy of my own daring, until the day I die. And I'm happy to do that. And the invitation to other people is that if you just orient to being a big brother or a big sister to the people who are right behind you, and you share in public the things you're learning that would help them, you'll eventually have so much success that other people will call you a spiritual influencer or a teacher or whatever. And that's actually a mark that you were doing the right thing.
I can speak as a person with 5 daughters that the little brothers, the little sisters, man, they want nothing more than a loving big brother or sister to play with them and show them the ropes. So
amen.
Your work's important.
Thank you, brother.
Here in this garden university. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Seeding the Mystery with Darren Michael. I'd really encourage you to check out his Make Your Myth journaling course. Changed my life personally. And you can also find him at the Dharma Artist Collective. Just Google that and you'll find it. And you can find him on Instagram. And thank you again.